Okay, cool.
And I'm able to let people in.
Okay. All right, everybody, we are at the September CAG meeting. Jerry, if you're paying attention, would you like to read the mission statement?
I'm not allowed to touch my phone otherwise I would. Serve as a trusted liaison between the community, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Montana Department of Environmental Quality by becoming informed, sharing this information with the public, and engaging in the Superfund process to ensure the restoration of the former Smurfit stone mill site to a healthy ecological state for future generations.
Online, do we still have an echo? I get a thumbs up or something from somebody?
Sounds good to me.
Thank you, Nolan. All right, let's start with introductions. Our technical expert and meeting agenda planner.
Elena Evans, so pleased to be here. Consuelo Valley Water Quality District.
Okay.
Bruce Sims with the CAG. Sam Carlson with the Water Coalition.
Andrew Porter with Water Coalition.
Well, it's Curtis at District 49.
Don McFarland, State Representative.
David Schmetterling, Montana Patrol Electric Parks.
She wears with Senator John Dusty's office.
Jerry Ellis, part of the admin team.
Ali Archer, Superfund Property Manager for EPA.
Bunny Sims, second subscriber. Local.
Kevin Stone, DEQ.
Doug Martin, the Natural Resource Damage Program.
Aston Water Natural Resource Damage Program. Carolina Blue, EPA. Mackenzie Meter, EPA.
Captain Jacob, EPA.
Dylan Long, District 14 Representative.
And I was 16 years on the Soil Conservation Board. Mineral County, that's why I keep reading it. I'm Joe Hughes from the Mineral County Conservation Board.
Okay, we'll go online. Katie.
Am I unmuted? Okay. Katie Garson Forba. I'm with DEQ. I'm the Bureau Chief for Superfund and Mine Land and Construction.
Nolan.
There we go. Hi, Nolan Lister. I'm a Public Information Officer for the Montana Department of Environmental Quality.
Abby.
Hi, I'm Abby Sherwood, and I'm a recent graduate from the University of Montana.
Thanks for joining. Catherine.
Catherine LaCour with EA Engineering. I provide technical support for EPA.
And Don.
Hi there, Don Nelson with DPHHS.
David. David Duke.
Looking for my mute button. David Duke with GSI Environmental.
I lost my place. Kristen.
Kristen Kukin with Senator Daines' office.
And Ryan.
Good evening. I'm Ryan Weiss. I work at Montana's Department of Natural Resources and Conservation in Helena as the Trust Lands Deputy.
Great. Thanks for joining. So we do have, I have the agenda on my phone here. We have two presentations, one from Ali, an update on field work, and one from Ryan on an overview of the DNRC Smurfit Stone memo. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Ali.
I'm trying to join, but my hotspot's not working, so by the time you're up there, I'll join the meeting and share the slides.
So you'll have to. Yeah, if you want to email it to me, I'm on the guest network. Okay. I probably can't get on there with the EPA computer.
Yeah, it's not letting me use my.
We can let Ryan go. We can let Ryan go too while we figure it out. Do you want the password to the Wi-Fi?
Do I have
that. Have I reached that level?
Red card one. Is it the,
Yeah, guess.
red card one, all lowercase? Yeah, sure. Red, capital R, capital C, one.
Capital One.
What's in your phone?
Oh, wait.
Is this a stand up or?
I'll sit down.
No pressure. Yeah.
Bring up people's one here. Just any moment now.
I know, so I have to get started, but there's not a lot before the slides. I have some background slides I could just talk through, and then hopefully they'll be up by the time we get into the fieldwork update. Because I think there are a couple people I haven't seen every meeting, and so I just wanted to go through a little history of the Superfund process. Back in 2010, we all know the mill closed down. EPA entered into an enforcement agreement with the potentially responsible parties, which are International Paper, West Rock, and M2 Green, to conduct the remedial investigation and feasibility at that site. We are currently in the remedial investigation phase, which is when we look at where is there contamination on site and at what levels. And we also complete our risk assessments where we look at unacceptable risk on site. That really drives our cleanup action. So entered into an agreement in 2015 and have been conducting sampling and looking at risk assessments since that time. I'm going to give an update on the field work that has occurred. Last month, I shared some monitoring well photos and a couple other images from the field work that occurred in July. And this month, I wanted to just do like a comprehensive update on what's been happening in 2024. So we had just a couple of statistics to pull up. But we've had two major field events, one in the spring and one in the fall. Oh yeah, see you, Mackenzie, she's in. You're in the waiting room. Yep, I hit the button. Woo-hoo, she's in. I'll keep talking through. So we had a larger event in the spring of this year where we drilled 10 monitoring wells, collected groundwater samples on site, and also started soil borings in some of the primary treatment ponds. So the solid waste basins, primary sludge ponds, and the spoils basins. In the summer, we built on that by completing additional soil borings, and we also drilled 2 additional wells. We're planning to get back out in the field in October to do a comprehensive groundwater sampling event across all of the wells on site with additional surface water sediment happening at the same time. Merging into the Frenchtown Working Group, I just put a map. We had extra maps from our meeting today out back or on the back table. And so if you guys want to pick up a map on your way out, it's all of the monitoring wells on site. So next month, we're thinking about posing to the CAG, having a little more discussion on the monitoring. Okay, we can go to the next slide. I'll jump back in here. All right, background, fieldwork update, and then a Frenchtown Working Group meeting update, and then questions. So this was the overview in the Superfund process. This happened, the preliminary assessment site inspection, 2011, 2012, where EPA first comes on site to collect data and propose the site to the Superfund list. And then in 2015, we began the remedial investigation and risk assessment. The next, that's looking at what and where are the risks on site. And then the next phase is how can it be cleaned up? So we're still looking at where do we have risk on site? Where is there contamination and at what levels? And that really wraps into the next slide where we have kind of a site overview and more of the history. But this, if you haven't seen the site very often, this is without the monitoring wells on it. But it's of course just south of here, located along the Clark Fork River. The pink is the former industrial area. And then we're also investigating all of the wastewater treatment ponds between the industrial area and the Clark Fork River. And then we've also investigated the surrounding agricultural lands, which are in yellow. So it's about a 3,000 acre site. Over 1,000 of that is the primary wastewater treatment area that we're investigating. And so going on to our fieldwork update. Oh yeah, I was gonna pause for a second before we get into fieldwork update. So we did recently get a lot of emails asking EPA to consider including the River Design Group flood flooding analysis in our risk assessments. And we've received over 100 from people who are really concerned about that. And I wanted to just talk about that with the CAG because you guys are really the key place that we go to with information sharing. And if you guys also share these concerns, wanted to be able to talk about it here. How we have been responding to everyone is flooding is an important issue and we do take it seriously with you all. However, it's not something that can be quantified in an EPA risk assessment. That's really looking at receptors. So I love marmots are on there because we know we have marmots on site. Potential future residents, construction workers, recreational visitors. So those receptors out on the site and what they're exposed to currently and potentially in the future with different reuse scenarios. We do look at flooding, but we look at it at the climate vulnerability assessment and we look at it for a sustainable long-term cleanup solution. So if there are concerns about how we're conducting our risk assessments and how we're taking flooding seriously on the site through now and through the cleanup process, please let us know. We're happy to talk about it. We did love the increased interest in the site and hopefully we'll bring more people to the CAG group too. I think we said, hey, for monthly updates, we do have this going on. But I just wanted to bring that up because it has been really forefront in our last month is making sure people get the information, know where to go for ongoing information, and that we're not ignoring that request, but that we're using both the flooding and the assessments kind of on a separate track, but they'll inform each other moving forward. Yeah.
Yes, Allie, if I'm hearing you, you're saying that might not get folded into the risk assessment, but would be relevant.
Is relevant.
Yeah, kind of in the feasibility study stage, looking at alternative development and selection.
Yeah, I think risk assessments are super specific with receptors, current and future exposures, and how we can mitigate that. It's really hard to quantify potential future hypothetical events because we're looking at what contamination is there now, but we will look at if this is a risk in the floodplain, how can we make a protective long-term remedy to make sure we're not having impact? So it comes into effect, I think now, because we know we have flooding as a concern. So what can we do in the interim? Is it an immediate action that needs to happen or not and why? And then as we build cleanup remedies, we're making sure we have a resilient remedy in place to protect now and into the future. We're going to have a risk assessor here in November, so he can speak to this better too, but there's not really a way to wrap it into all of the specific calculations that occur in a risk assessment. It doesn't mean that it's not important or considered, but it just is something that we were not able to accommodate through the Superfund process in that way, but that it is considered in a lot of other ways. So it's a very nuanced response to those. Appreciate it. We are going to consider the report and take that very seriously. We're working through the climate vulnerability assessment with headquarters right now, so we're hoping to get that out to you guys shortly too. And then as we need adjustments to our berm contingency plan where we monitor during high flows, we can always talk about that too. And I know everyone's eager to get to resilient cleanup long-term solutions. And so we'll be looking at flooding very seriously when we look at where do we have risk on site and how do we be protective. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the concern.
Mineral count?
Yes. On site is, that's your water table, that's the contaminants of the water. But if the berm is breached in high water, we get everything down there, spread out through the whole county and into Sanders County. So I've mentioned it before too. That's why I keep talking about the Mineral County.
Yeah.
There's the downstream effect of any of the breach. The on-site site stuff, won't affect us the same way.
Yes.
So we're glad to hear.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear.
And I think it's such a confusing thing to be it's not in a risk assessment, but we do look at the risk of it. When we are just quantifying risks to future receptors on site, flooding is not a part of that. It's the current conditions now. And then when we look at if we have things that are going to be, and we know we will have things that could be mobilized due to extreme flooding, we build that into a protective cleanup discussion. So I feel like that is so in the weeds on Superfund, but hopefully our emails were able to be understood by folks, and that we will look at all of the new data we're collecting and use that in the risk assessment. So the risk assessments are going to be adjusted and evaluated based on all the data that we've collected over the last couple of years, but it's still not possible to have a hypothetical flood event quantified in the risk assessment, but we will consider its impacts on downstream people for sure. Okay, I forgot about that quick side note that we were
I don't throw out the worries right here because the economic, the water table and all of that. They're saying that one big flood and all the other cleanup is probably still happening except right behind that berm.
And I had one more thought on that. And this is probably the most community emails I've ever received on a topic. And that's why I just wanted to bring it up at the CAG too, is it's probably the most interest that I've gotten on a singular topic since I've been since 2019. So I was like, if you guys have seen it or you had questions, please know, or concerns too, let us know, and hoping to keep, following up with Clark Fork and American Rivers on how we can work together moving forward too. So, all right. Summary of 2024 field activities. And this does not include what's happening in October, where we have another field event. I just wanted to do to date what's been happening. Because I think we have been really busy, and a part of that is the Frenchtown Working Group meeting every month to discuss upcoming work plans and where we're headed. Since January till now, we've been on site for 9 weeks. It was I think 5 in the spring and 4 in the summer. So have had over 9 weeks on site, which means full-time field oversight teams for EPA, the PRPs out there collecting data. We've completed drilling and installation of 12 new monitoring wells this year, bringing us up to, I think, 63 wells on site and 4 new lysimeters. We've also completed 26 boreholes within the solid waste basins, primary sludge ponds, and spoils basins. There have been 12 access roads constructed to get into those primary sludge ponds and spoils basins. We've collected over 188 samples in 2024, of which we're hoping to get data back as soon as possible. And then you just missed my fun ones, Mackenzie. I wanted to include, we had a temperature swing of, it was as low as 26 degrees one day when we were out there in April, and then as hot as 102 when we were out there in August. So we've all gone through a wide variety of field days out there, including snow. And then the last one was, we had an air quality index of over 130 for 2 days there when we had the Miller Peak fire popping off. So just wanted to share that this group's put in a ton of work. And to slide into the working group on that, we do have a technical working group for the site. It's made up of Missoula County, Natural Resource Damages Program, DEQ, Clark Fork Coalition, Fish Wildlife Parks, U.S. Fish Wildlife Service, U.S. Forest Service, Montana Trout Unlimited, and GSI attends for the PRPs. I've covered everyone. And CSKT, they weren't here today, so we're going to share their notes, but they do attend all the other meetings. And we meet every month right before the CAG meeting to talk about the technical details of what's happening on site with the sampling and the data that we're starting to get back. We have just started diving into the data from a year ago, last fall. So today we had our groundwater monitoring well maps, and we're looking at some of that initial investigation coming back. And Haley and Aldridge were the main presenters this month. They support Department of Environmental Quality for the state of Montana on the site. Quick plug, we're going to meet with Bruce and see if that's something that we'd like the CAG to have parts of for an upcoming CAG meeting. Is we want to take parts of their presentation or all of it. And they said they'd be available to possibly come in October or later month to talk about what we discussed today. So we want to see if since you attended both, what you kind of thought.
Yeah, I think it's a great presentation.
Yeah. Okay. We'll get back to them.
Great visual displays and easily understood.
Okay, so something for a future agenda for this group. But yeah, they basically prepared all of our groundwater elevation data. We looked at manganese, arsenic, PCBs, and dioxin furans, and the different data that we've gotten back from 2015 through 2023, and kind of the trend analysis, the hotspots on site. So they ran through all of that with the group. And then we had some good discussion about upcoming groundwater monitoring. In the next month, we are trying to finalize 2 data summary reports. I know David Tukes online. First of all, the 11A data, and then we're starting to get spring data in. So we're hoping to also get the spring data summary report finalized. Once we finalize those reports, that data gets uploaded and described, and we can share those data summary reports publicly. So that's why it's kind of important to make sure we're on top of reviewing and finalizing those summary reports for everyone. We also are trying to finalize a work plan for the fall groundwater monitoring event. We just got it this end of last week. So we're busy getting that finalized. So we can get out in the field in October, and then our field work will start again in October. So that's kind of what's upcoming. I think my next slide is just for questions.
Well, when you're talking about fall field work, what are you planning?
We're planning to sample, I think, all the wells on site for all analytes and 10 surface water sediment samples as well. But I have barely glimpsed the draft work plan this week. So I'm going to go back to, we're going to get home tonight and then start looking at it tomorrow.
Any other questions for Ally in the room?
I guess, when will the soil sampling begin?
For
Or has it been concurrent with the groundwater?
the borehole data has been concurrent when we're on site with groundwater. So we're starting to get that soil data back from the spring. And then we also did additional in the summer. I think we did 2 or 3 more solid waste basin F in the soils basins, and then pond 5 and pond 3 had the access roads constructed. So got additional soil data. So it was part of spring and summer.
Okay.
Stuck in?
Yes. So like funny that how many roads had to be built, but yeah. We did make it out. No one was injured. There was a destroyed vehicle, but.
Maybe a question for David, since he might have looked at the work plan a little more. David, do you remember where the soil or the surface water sediment stations are?
Yeah, they're pretty complementary with the previous work that was done, Brian. So you can look in the RI work plan and look in the work that was done in 2015. And I believe there was some additional work done a couple years later. We tried to pick locations that were previously sampled to get a timeline started.
Thank you. Anybody online have any questions for Ally?
Hey, Ally, I guess going back to the flooding risk question, or can we expect a formal response on the letter that we wrote to you guys on that?
I'm trying to remember the letter. Did you ask for a response in the letter?
Probably.
Yeah, I mean, more or less.
About including it in a risk assessment?
Yeah, I guess I appreciate the fact that the EPA will assess the risk, even if it's not in a risk assessment, but
Yes.
I guess
Yeah.
I don't totally agree with the fact that the statements that they can't assess that specific risk based on new data about the mobility of waste from a flooding event.
From the RDG report?
Yeah. So I guess.
Yeah, I think with that
for me
one.
to fully understand.
Yeah.
That position, it'd be helpful to have.
And something that we've talked about is like you have sediments or you have like the pond material being mobilized, but we would have to associate that with a contaminant and then look at the risk to that contaminant to downstream receptors. And so like just through modeling that, and I'll have Will explain it too, but you have to quantify actual contamination and the exposure to that in a risk assessment. And so hypothetical events, it's hard to quantify with certainty what that would look like. It doesn't mean that the potential for a flooding impact on a site isn't considered. It's just not usually quantified in a human health risk assessment. But I'm sure we'll respond. Sorry if I didn't, I don't remember.
No, I mean, you responded immediately, but I mean like a formal response would be helpful just so we can fully understand.
Yeah, we can provide one more response.
And thank you, Andrew. That does bring up, what is the timeline for finalizing the climate funnel build? You know what I'm trying to.
Yeah. We had initial comments and we just re-reviewed it and they weren't incorporated. And a lot of it was like making sure we had all the information and that the language was consistent with the language that we used for the site. And so we just shared those back to headquarters because we thought they'd incorporate all of our comments and they hadn't. And then I talked to DEQ about getting it to them like middle of this month. And so we're hoping they could take a look and then we'll be able to share it with you guys right after. So I was hoping October. I just didn't realize they hadn't addressed our comments initially, but hopefully that won't take very long. They're not changing the climate vulnerability assessment. They're just making it consistent with all of our site documentation. So I shouldn't expect to be long, but yeah.
So maybe for the November meeting when Will's here?
Yeah, I think we could plan for November for the CPA.
Anybody else from the room or online? Going once, going twice. Okay. Thank you, Ally. All right, next up we have Ryan. Ryan, do you have slides to share?
No, I don't have slides.
Okay, great. You have the floor.
All right, great. Well, thanks for having me. Again, everyone, my name is Ryan Weiss. I work for Montana's Department of Natural Resources and Conservation. I'm in the Forestry and Trust Lands Division. We also have a Water Resources Division and Conservation and Resources Development Division. So I thought I'd start off tonight and give you a brief introduction of what the nexus might be with Montana's DNRC and the Smurfit Stone site. Talk a little bit about navigability for title and riverbed ownership and the DNRC's claim to ownership. And then also kind of a summary of historical, legal, and scientific principles of navigability and ownership and how that affects our ability or our inability to affect trespass regarding outfall infrastructure. And this is all kind of stems from a request from the Environmental Quality Council made, I think it was January of this year. And then Representative Carlin reached out to me recently and asked if I could visit with you all and provide a summary of the findings from the DNRC with respect to these outfall infrastructure, meaning the pipes in the river, riverbank, berms, and other infrastructure that's in the floodplain. So to begin with, DNRC, we manage under the trust, forestry and trust lands, we manage about 5 million acres of surface acres, 6 million acres of subsurface, as well as navigable riverbeds that have been adjudicated. And we do this under the direction and with delegated authority from the State Board of Land Commissioners, who are our top 5 elected officials. These lands were granted to Montana under the Enabling Act by the federal government at statehood. And the Enabling Act and the state constitution dictate how we manage these lands and the authorities we have to manage these lands, as well as what the proceeds or the benefits are and the purpose of these lands, which is generally to financially support common schools or K-12 schools, the state university system, and other public institutions. So we refer to the 12 beneficiaries as the trust beneficiaries, but most of the state trust lands in Montana are sections 16 and 36 throughout the townships. If it was already reserved for other purposes, those lands were generally selected elsewhere throughout the state. And we have some large consolidated blocks of state lands on the western part of the state. Daniels County in the northeastern part of the state is mostly trust lands. And then there's discrete segments of riverbed that were determined navigable through an adjudication process. So title to that riverbed transferred from the federal government to the state at statehood. And that all stems from the equal footing doctrine. It's a legal principle that basically says as states enter the union through the enabling acts and different state constitutions, they have equal footing with the original 13 colonies. So there's a lot of history here. I'll try to summarize it and not make it as confusing as it has been to me. But in general, once statehood occurs, under the equal footing doctrine, if a river was navigable at the time of statehood, the title to the riverbed goes to the state. But state law dictates what those requirements are. And so under a series of state statutes that the legislature has passed and administrative rules that the department and the land board have approved, we have criteria on how to determine navigability for title and claims on ownership. So because the state claims a riverbed is navigable, it generally means that we have evidence, whether it's historical, geomorphic, legal. We believe we have evidence that if the riverbed were to be adjudicated by a court of law, as it's required by state statute, that we would have title. And if not, it generally would go back to the federal government or to the landowners who live on and own property on either side of the riverbed. So these statutes and administrative rules provide guidelines for how we claim ownership, how we authorize use of the riverbed, and how we would file claims of any trespass. If, for example, we own the riverbed and there was an unauthorized use of that riverbed. And then there's also case law, this is where it gets really confusing. And for the benefit of all of you, I'm not an attorney, but I've been studying this for probably the last 6 or 7 months to try to get caught up to speed with what is the nexus with DNRC and the riverbeds here. But there's a pretty complex series of case law. There's ongoing litigation that began in 2005 with riverbeds here in Montana, including the Clark Fork River, that essentially boiled down to hydroelectric dams on the Clark Fork, the Missouri, and the Madison. And because those dams were on the riverbed without an authorization, the state claimed ownership of and rent for the use of that riverbed to benefit the common schools. And that's ongoing. It's currently under appeal. It's been going on since 2005. So there's two big cases here that kind of hinge on the path forward. So aside from the case law, based on the available evidence that the state has, we claim ownership of the Clark Fork riverbed. And under state statute and administrative rules, we could only claim between the low water marks, which are a legal definition, not necessarily a scientific one. We could claim ownership below the low water marks and between the low water marks. So that would be essentially the range of our purview, so to speak. So it's, again, just between the low water marks and beneath the low water marks of the riverbed. And so we believe that if we were to pursue quiet title action or the riverbed were to be adjudicated, we would prevail. But based on ongoing litigation that's under appeal right now, that could change the calculus of our ownership. So again, unless it's been adjudicated, we don't hold title to it, so we can claim it, but we don't own it. So where that leaves us now is basically if a court were to find that we do have title to the riverbed, there are also state statutes and administrative rules that govern how we authorize the use, how anything that would be in trespass can be rectified. So that would really give, according to state statute, a 5-year grace period for anything, say, for example, in this particular reach of the Clark Fork riverbed. It's adjudicated for title, the state owns it. Anything in trespass in that river segment, there'd be 5 years to either remove that item or to get authorization from the DNRC for it to remain on the riverbed or beneath the riverbed. And there's also a statute that says that the DNRC is required to authorize the use if it predates October of 2011. So the pipes are, in this particular instance, the outfall structure that's on or beneath the riverbed has been there since before 2011. So we really don't have a lot of leverage to legally require anything to be removed. Now, statute and rule also allows for what's called a contingent use authorization. So for example, if somebody were to say, we know that this riverbed has not been adjudicated for title, but should it be adjudicated for title, we know that we have something here that's not authorized. We'd like to apply for a license or a lease or an easement, and then the department could grant that, but it's not required. And I guess in summary, the pipes and any of the outfall infrastructure that were to be found in trespass, if for example the riverbed is owned by the state, there'd be a 5-year period for us to work with the landowners to either remove them or authorize them, or they could be removed without our authorization. So I know that's a lot. It's pretty, it's confusing and it's fairly complex, and it's taken me a while to unravel this series of legal principles and case law and statute and rule. But that's kind of where we sit right now, and that is essentially a summary of what our findings were and our response to the Environmental Quality Council was a couple months ago regarding how to affect removal of the pipes in the Clark Fork River.
Great, Ryan. I think we have some questions in the room. Jerry, you want to start?
Yeah, I have a question. Ryan, how does the Hellgate Treaty fit in with the tribe, and how their claims, obviously, to the river fit in with the state statutes, and how do you adjudicate and how do you wind in their rights to the river with your 5-year contingency use authorization?
Are you referring to adjudication for water rights?
Yeah, I mean, how with the trespassing, what does I guess I'm just kind of wondering, does the tribe trump the state's position on this or not?
I guess theoretically it could. That hasn't been contemplated in any of the ongoing litigation, but if we were to, for example, if the state were to file a quiet title action to adjudicate title to the riverbed, the tribes could present evidence that could show their ownership. We really don't know.
Is there a way to find out, or is it, I mean, I'm not trying to be argumentative, but 5 years seems like it's kind of slow, I guess. And so I'm just kind of wondering if there's ways to expedite the process.
Existing statute has that 5-year, essentially like grace period, so that the statute could be changed. But what currently can't be changed is how we adjudicate the riverbed, and that's in a court of, it's specific, the law says a court of competent jurisdiction. So it would have to go to trial, or, you know, it'd have to be litigated essentially. It isn't necessarily just an administrative process that we would follow to determine ownership. And there's a lot of uncertainties that I'm not necessarily familiar with, not being an attorney. But that's been going through the court for the last 19, almost 20 years now.
Other questions? Yes.
I guess one thing that confuses me is that in the December DNRC memo, and I'll read from it directly, it says DNRC trust land staff made 2 visits to the site to observe the location of infrastructure outfall pipes between the low water marks of the Clark Fork River. Some outfall infrastructure is located below the low water mark. Then in the memo from DNRC in July, it says there is no trespass on state trust lands in the Clark Fork River. And so I guess what confuses me is it seems like those are 2 pretty different positions. And so is the position of DNRC that there is trespass, but the agency can't even, I guess, assert that there is. And I realize that's not something that can be mitigated tomorrow, but the agency can say, yes, this is trespass. So is the position that there is trespass, but the agency doesn't act unless the courts have adjudicated something that this is being owned, or is it that there actually isn't trespass at all?
It's a little bit of both of what the latter Representative Carlin. So we claim ownership, but until the riverbed's been adjudicated, we don't own it. We just believe that we would if the adjudication process would play out. And we did work with Allie and the property owners to get permissive access to go in through the site and try to do a quantitative analysis of what if, for example, the riverbed were adjudicated, what is on or beneath the riverbed between the low water marks. And it amounts to a pretty small area. It's really just, I want to say, I don't have the figure with me, but that first memo that I think you read from that was completed, I want to say in November of 2023, that indicates that some of the pipes might be on the riverbed or below the low water mark, but not all. And that's, we didn't find anything new. We flew a drone. We tried to get some imagery to capture, but we effectively can't claim. We can claim ownership, but we don't own it. So we can't claim trespass on something we don't own. And I know this is kind of circular and not particularly clear, but I think, you know, the current body of law has very specific requirements for ownership, and we haven't met that in a court of law.
I got another question if you're done on this. Go ahead.
So Ryan, is the department going to come to the legislature with any proposed legislation to provide clarification on this issue? Because I think looking at everything, it's ripe for some type of settlement to this issue.
That's a good question. We don't have proposed legislation regarding ownership of the riverbed right now. It's not to say we won't. We just don't have anything right now that would necessarily add clarity to the process.
Jerry?
Yeah, I guess I just kind of want to go back a little tiny bit about way back in time. Was there ever a permitting process where somebody signed off on that? Or I guess I'm trying to try to put together some sort of link chain, some sort of document that might exist.
Right, and I think based on my understanding, historically there wasn't a claim of ownership on riverbeds by the state or State Department of Lands or DNRC. a lot of stuff, a lot of infrastructure, whether it was irrigation infrastructure or outfall infrastructure, from facilities like this were permitted through other agencies. And in 2011 is when there was a lawsuit that kind of initiated this interest in, well, who at the state would own the riverbed. And that's why anything that was, that's why there's a statute that says anything prior to 2011 is kind of grandfathered in. And so it's really a recent, within the last 20 years, it's a, an issue that the state and through the DNRC has been litigating riverbeds on a segment by segment basis. And in the way that the case law has played out is it's not necessarily an entire riverbed from the headwaters, to the confluence with the next downstream basin. It's you have to have a very strict criteria of historical use, of commerce, and there's a long list of things, and that's currently what's being contemplated in one of the court cases that's on appeal right now. So the rules might change is essentially what the way I understand it.
Let's go to Elena and then Andrew.
Yeah, so I was curious, does DNRC collect taxes on anything that isn't adjudicated?
No, we do not. We don't collect taxes, but we can, I mentioned earlier, there's a statute that says if somebody wants to apply for a contingent right license or lease or easement, they can apply. It's voluntary. And
so
then
part of the concern around this is a function of who's responsible and owns the outfall pipes as a function of the fact that the MPDES permit was revoked and therefore the relic infrastructure that won't be used again. And given that the berms can't be included in the risk assessment, they're not going to be considered in the ROD.
They were in the risk assessment. They don't have contaminated material. So they're not an elevated risk due to contaminated material in the risk assessment, but they are considered.
So who does EPA say owns them?
Wow. I think they're a part of the property ownership, and as we get to a remedy decision, if they impact the remedy or not, they can be considered at that time in the Superfund process. So that's outside of DNRC or ownership currently, but if there's something that says the berm stays or goes, the property owner owns the berm and what's within it, so I think that would be a part of the cleanup decision at that time, but just to say they are included.
There's just no risk associated with the berms.
Contaminant, yeah, we look at elevated contaminant risk. So the berms are made of native material, and we don't look at infrastructure like a pipe. We look at industrial toxics and how that can impact the human health or the environment. We would look at if waste was on site and moved through pipes, where did it end up? That's part of risk assessment. As a part of a protective remedy, we can look at, are the outfall pipes impacting the berm if that's a part of the remedial decision? But I was thinking about how to answer Andrew's question more because we look at current conditions. So our risk assessment says currently on site, we have these contaminants in the outer holding ponds. We make clean decisions around that. If we're to say, hey, the flood's gonna wash all away, we then have to say, so that material is not on site. How do we do a protective cleanup with all the material downstream? And that's why we look at current conditions and build a protective remedy to make sure it's protected in the long term against floods or anything like that. So another risk assessment plug.
Andrew.
Hey, Ryan, this is Andrew Gorder with the Clarkport Coalition. Thanks for your presentation. I think that some of the frustration around the position you can probably understand is that that as you mentioned, it's like a segment by segment look at the river, and the Clarkport River in this segment seems, I don't think there's any question that it's navigable for purposes of title. I think you guys even said that you believe that it is in your memo, and I don't think that there would be any reasonable way to dispute that from the perspective of a riverbed user. So it's frustrating that we can't, and it actually was adjudicated by a court in Montana and by the Supreme Court, but then that was appealed, but they never said in the appeal that this section of Clarkport River is not navigable. It was never in dispute. So that's a little frustrating, but I guess my takeaway or suggestion, because they brought up policy reforms, is for an idea maybe for the DNRC for this grandfathering of existing infrastructure. It seems to me like that was meant to protect facilities that were actually in functioning, you know, and this facility has been closed, as Selena brought up, for a long time, and the infrastructure is just there. And our concern is always that this was the largest discharger in existence on the Clark Fork River when it was operating. And if that infrastructure can't be removed by anyone, and the state's not going to dictate that removal, it could just be resurrected at some point in the future. So maybe a suggestion for a policy reform would be some kind of caveat in the law that says this is only meant to protect active existing facilities like hydroelectric dams that are still operating, as opposed to people who have abandoned their infrastructure in the river. So just more of a takeaway.
Yeah, thanks for that. I could certainly appreciate the frustration with this, in that it's not as simple as I thought it was 6 months ago. And, you know, digging into it, there's certainly a lot of nuances that, you know, are specific to segment by segment. And then again, the grandfathering in and whether or not it was permitted by a different agency. And then you know, to your point, what happens once that permit has been revoked or expired or terminated. But, you know, right now we do claim that we believe that should this go to court, we would prevail, but we don't know that with certainty. And because of ongoing litigation that involves the Clark Fork River, though not this specific segment, we just don't know. So there's still a lot that has to work through the courts that would provide us, I guess, more clarity for what an effective policy reform would be. But I appreciate your comment and suggestion.
Yeah, and so maybe this is just like me mixing up all the DNRC rules that they use or enforce, but the pipes weren't in use in terms of serving a purpose as a part of the MPDES permit in 2011 because the mill was no longer in operation. So I don't know if that has any nuance in the context of whether or not it's grandfathered in.
It could. I don't know the answer to that. That's a good question, and that's something that I'd probably need to consult with some attorneys on how to interpret that statute.
Bruce,
I'm just wondering, brainstorming, if federal 404 permitting has some way of handling derelict infrastructure in the river.
It's a good question, and I think the answer now with the current laws would be yes. You know, very much the same way that there's a whole series when you apply to work in the riverbed. There's a whole series of agencies that have to be involved with the joint 310 law. And now, you know, moving forward or in current times, that's how it would go. But there is this exemption, so to speak, for anything that existed prior to 2011. And it doesn't say that it has to be active or, you know, or under, you know, compliant with any permits, but there's a lot, I guess there's multiple solutions that just haven't been put together and proposed yet.
I've only permitted to put stuff in the river. I've never permitted to take stuff out of the river.
When was the 310 law brought into?
Yeah, I mean, it's
early 70s.
Yeah, 72.
The outfall pipes weren't permitted under the 310 law, but they could be in violation of 310.
That's what I'm asking. Is that holding pardon upon water or not?
Yes.
I didn't hear the last. I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last question.
The last question was a discussion of the 310 law. And if these pipes weren't permitted under that law, could they be in violation of that law?
Gotcha. Okay.
My question, this is Representative Logan. In all what you've been doing in your study in the last few months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, if you can put together some sort of legislation that could correct this situation and present it to one of us to carry in the session, if you in your discussions in hallways and in your offices, come up with something that could correct this so this doesn't happen again if it exists somewhere else.
Sure. No, I think it's a great idea. One of the things that from what and I wasn't around in 2011 in this capacity, But from what I understand, there was a lot of concern that the DNRC could essentially overassert authority with respect to every irrigation intake and outfall, which is why this, the statute, and again, this is my understanding, I wasn't in the legislature or providing testimony, but there was concern that the state could overassert authority and make it difficult for irrigators. So this is, maybe a not necessarily exceptional case, but it's a little different than what was contemplated back in the day.
Yeah, and set up some sort of an appeal process too, if it did go awry.
Sure.
Kevin.
This is Kevin at DEQ, and Ryan, I just want to thank you all. I mean, I can appreciate the lift this has been to kind of investigate and work through the weeds there. You all have been really responsive to us at DEQ, and I think to EQC as well. So just kind of wanted to give that shout out. And also just suggest, I think, the effort here to determine what it would take to be able to be in a position to order the PRPs, or more likely the current landowners to remove the pipes, is certainly one direction, and probably takes either a legislative fix and also likely litigation to move to that direction. Just wanted to throw out, and maybe the desire is not there, but there's always the possibility of simply funding their removal and looking at other alternatives to do that. If it's truly in local, county, state interest to do that, I think the mechanism of ordering their removal is certainly not the only option. So it's worth it.
Yeah, thanks for that comment. And I think, one of the first times I went before the EQC, not realizing what a deep dive this would be, I suggested we could offer, an authorization, which essentially results back to a contingent use authorization. It's not required, but we want to help facilitate the successful outcome of this site. We don't want to get in the way, So if there's a cooperative or voluntary way we could work with, whether it's the PRPs, the property owners, and all the other stakeholders, we're in for that. We certainly don't want to be an obstacle here. I think the way I've been describing it internally with staff is we just don't carry a stick. We don't have leverage here to force removal of anything. It's more of a carrot approach of like, well, if it would help the process by authorizing a contingent use license, we could do that. But it's not required currently by law.
Yes.
Just a question, has the CD been involved in the conservation district? Because there are other grants, we've taken car bodies out of the streams and things like that, and there should be some grant possibly to fix this if they propose that.
So the Missoula Conservation District wrote a letter saying that they didn't want to see the berms ripped in perpetuity. So they're interested in ensuring that the 310 Stream Bed Act is fulfilled at the time that the record of decision alternatives are put forward.
But they don't look at trying to do the removal themselves.
No, I think they think we could maybe have Tim or Rad speak to it, but I think they think that the company put the pipes in, and the berms. So I think they'd prefer to help irrigators and farmers and folks who are having a harder time keeping their infrastructure in place than necessarily a Superfund site. I think that's part of the issue.
No, I was just thinking a separate grant.
Yeah.
Wouldn't take away.
Yeah, I'm sure they would listen to the Frenchtown Community Advisory Council in terms of that interest.
Anything else for Ryan in the room? Anything for Ryan online? Going once, going twice? Okay. Ryan, thank you very much. That was definitely not an easy topic to walk us through. So thank you.
No, and yeah, you're welcome. And if you have questions, please reach out. Be happy to try to talk through this and potential solutions here, or facilitate, as I mentioned earlier, the pipes removal to the extent that we can. Well, thanks again. I've got to run pick up some kids from soccer, but appreciate the time and the invitation.
Thank you. Yeah, we're on, any other topics not on the agenda, so you're up.
So my question to Helena and to Ally. So being an irrigator for, most of my life, we all know what happens when pipes or gophers and they're burrowing into irrigation banks and the like take place. My concern here, and I'm sure is shared by a number of folks, is where are we with the degradation of those pipes? And what impact that degradation, or has anybody looked at the viability of those pipes? And if they should fail, how is that, or what impact is that going to have on the berms? And I think this is something that's not really been looked at, but I think it needs to be looked at carefully and quickly, because we all know the status of that berm. And this is something that definitely can undermine that berm in a hurry.
Those berms are pretty in there, but I agree. I think animal burrowing and other impacts of the berm are a concern, and we do include that in our monthly inspections when we go out and just make sure what have we seen increase, or what's the activity in the berms? Are we concerned about stability? And then we have response actions in place if we do get a high flow year. But we're kind of in that collecting data, moving toward a final CETA decision. So we're in that continuity. We're aware of the outfall pipes, we're aware of the concerns. We know there are animal burrows. We know we have areas of stability concern already identified, like adjacent to 13A where we saw the boils. And we have response actions in place while we finish up our remedial investigation. That's kind of the best we can do during the superfund process of things.
I haven't seen them, but are they galvanized?
They're.
Are they coming?
I
think they're old steel pipes.
Yeah, they're steel pipes. I remember them.
You figure the rust on that, the life of those is probably 20, 25 years, and they're deteriorating from within.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we have our eyes on them, but we've been shooting at them.
Probably
the biggest one of.
Jerry can probably take them out tomorrow night. Issue with our suggesting. So, but yeah, no, I agree. They're in the berm. The berms are a concern. We have our eyes on them. We've sampled the berms, and now we have to get to a cleanup decision and wrap the berms into how it'll impact a cleanup decision. And until we get there, we're going to monitor and have response actions. But we can't make a final cleanup decision until we get through all of the sampling and risk assessment. So we're moving as quickly as we can with the stakeholders and our sampling and our characterization, and doing everything we can to monitor and respond to the berms during that time.
Does that mean you might go earlier than 2028, which is a horrendous thing to think about?
What do you mean, want us to go quicker than that? Ooh, you got to be here.
Years from now, we might be looking at fixing the berms and the pipes. What?
I mean, yeah, we are moving to collect additional data and build cleanup decisions with the stakeholders, and that's how long we think it'll take to get all the sampling that we need. But we'll move as quickly as we can, buddy. But with some of this group's request to slow down and do additional characterization that we're focusing on right now too, we're getting a lot of good information and new monitoring wells. So we're striking that balance of, yes, people want a clean decision, but also there was a demand for more information.
Right, I don't think we ever said slow down.
No, just slow down and let's see the process. Yeah.
I think we said thorough.
Yeah.
Slow down.
Thorough, convenient. Well, we're moving as quick as we can and getting all the information to hopefully bring it community on. I heard a little rain pull back from this group. That's what I heard. But no, I hear you. And I know we need to move quicker. Yeah.
Every time people say 2028, huh? It's just like exclamation point, exclamation point.
Yeah. Superfund's not a fast process. Milltown will remember this. We're very, we're tied with them on a remedial investigation.
But we need to see it.
So I'm getting ready to get this first. Yeah, okay, moving on. I hear you.
Anything else, Elena, you?
Well, yeah, I was curious if EQC or DEQ heard any feedback from DNRC on the Montana Dam Safety Act. other state laws and rules and regulations that may come into play.
Yeah, not specifically, at least that I've seen on the Dam Safety Act, but that's something I can follow up on. Yeah, I'll follow up on the Dam Safety Act in terms of like liability for berms.
Yeah.
Maintenance.
So is EQC done with this topic? Or is it, because it seemed like their letter was basically
That's
end of no. I mean, that, to me, that's what it's felt like. We're done talking about this until there can be some kind of legislation that can define this in a definitive way.
Or
I guess
we
is how I-
focus in on one or two other aspects. Like, who owns how do we deal with the ownership of the stream bed? I mean, so there are a variety of things that we can look at, but for all practical purposes, we're done.
Okay.
Okay.
That's how I read it. That's how I kind of.
I'll just add, so I mean, everything wraps up in the interim because we're headed toward the next session, but you know, I'm talking with the agencies, particularly DEQ, you know, about the potential to see if maybe EQC recommend that the legislature appropriate some funds for the state to collect some information specifically regarding berms and some of these unanswered questions and try to kind of arm the state with some more information going into future steps in the Superfund process, like including what Elena mentioned, but also things like, you know, the impacts of, you know, economic impacts of berm removal, keeping and things like that. So that's something that might come of this, and I'll probably not the October meeting, I can provide an update.
Thank you.
We have been, you know, based on representatives' interest, you know, we have been doing what I would call some kind of pre-scoping, you know, identifying what's been done, you know, what exists, what the, you know, a quick look at what the quality of assessments of the, you know, engineering assessments of the berms and things like that in the past have been, so that we can provide, you know, EQC or the legislature with, empower them to make decisions around what kind of policy directions or funding decisions they might need to make.
And Jerry, the EQC or any of the interim committees can't really take action as far as make laws happen, but they can take the action to write a bill to bring in. So that's why, you know, they'll react and discuss these things, but you're not going to move action.
No.
They'll wait till the next session.
But remember, we have a one day meeting
In September.
and we have a full agenda already. And, you know, we can bring the issue up. I'm going to, at my water policy interim committee meeting next week, I'm going to bring this up. Okay. But again, pretty much at this point, we're going to look at legislation that the agencies propose. And you've heard DNRC say, no, we're not going to do anything for this interim. So again, just want to tell you where we are with the lay of the land.
And I can say unequivocally that river is covered under the Clean Water Act and state legislation regarding water quality. So there's a lot of water quality avenues that we should look into that would probably achieve the same purpose, you know, as ownership would.
As I say, every stone needs to be overturned.
You know, the ownership thing, you know, that's, who knows how that's going to fly.
Well, I think the legislature can take we can get the right legislation through, we can take a civic whack at the issue.
Yeah.
But that's, I mean, I'm not seeing anybody interested in moving that direction at this point.
Yeah.
Anything else on this topic? No. I think we have a request from Mineral County.
Yes, Joe Hughes.
Joe,
What's that?
do we have a request from?
Oh, yeah. Mineral County would like to have a presentation down someplace in Superior or St. Regis, kind of similar to the presentation, I think maybe that you did in June 6th meeting, and then you did one in Alberton. A sequence like that would be really appreciated. The Conservation District would give any support probably for that if need be.
and we could make arrangements for the group, as long as we knew maybe what you guys would like to have or needed as a, for presentation. You know, a place to do it, you know.
Some of this monitoring maps that were showing.
So it sounds like maybe an update from Ally on what's going on site. And then were you also interested in, so Sam gave a really good presentation last month on the berm failure study that the Clark Board.
Engineering group that,
Yeah.
you know, from Whitefish that they presented in Alberton. All of that would be wonderful. You really appreciate it.
Would you to be, I assume you guys are willing?
I am willing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. When do you have your, and so Ally, will you coordinate directly?
Because do you guys meet, is it like a meeting that you want us to attend or just to set up an outside time?
Set it now. So it'd be a public meeting, like, you know, like this year, I think, and do executive, something like that.
Yeah, we
Did one that would be good. And we could find a meeting hall and all that stuff.
Okay, good.
Sure.
Great.
What's that acronym stand?
Community Advisory Group. Our official name is the Frenchtown Smurfit Stone Community Advisory Group, and it's abbreviated as K.
Any other, thank you, we'll make one happen.
Sorry, can I add on? Because like I used to be a part of the Superior Technical Advisory Group for their Superfund site. Are they like, I don't know if they're still active or not, but we could coordinate with the staff to have a joint Superfund meeting. Or I don't know if they're.
You're talking about.
Yeah, but they had an organized Superfund group that we could.
Allie, I don't think they're still active.
Okay. Never mind.
That was quite a while ago.
I was taking off like two.
Well, they had to come back in and redo, so they were kind of a little active then, but
Yeah.
the initial group.
It's like 2010, it's like that. That makes sense, okay.
Cleaning up everybody's driveway.
Any other topics for this meeting, comments?
Topics for next meeting?
Well, we talked about, and I don't know, Kevin, are you okay with it?
Yep.
Okay.
Tissue data?
Yeah, as of right now, we don't have anything back, and I don't see it happening for next meeting.
So we do have Haley and Aldridge on for October to give a similar presentation that they gave this afternoon. Anybody else have a topic for next month? Next month will be October. You won't be in the field
I
quite.
think Fiona and I were planning on calling in last week, her just to prioritize getting all the work plans organized in the field. So I think we're planning to attend virtually in October. We can, once she gets back in, we'll talk about if we are already here and can go over what does that look like.
Okay. We should have some data summary reports by then.
Yes.
So, anybody have any other topics?
I put a note down about a climate info.
It sounds like that's not till November.
November, Jeff, buddy.
That's November.
Yeah, November.
Just checking.
Yeah.
Well, we got one topic so far.
Okay.
We always seem to get more, kind of Alina, I was gonna, just if anybody knows, it was really pretty cool to see Mary Price on, the M2 Green update from the commissioners a couple weeks ago. So maybe she's back in development, which would be amazing.
We have heard that she is back part-time. And we have also heard but not seen that they have filled her position.
Okay.
And I think that person, I believe they started in early September.
So they just start.
Yeah, so. All right, anything from anybody online? Okay, I think that's it. Thank you all.
Thank you, folks.